Okay, so today I thought we might do a quick flight during my lunchtime from work from London Stansted over to Rotterdam. So we're going to quickly skip over and look in LittleNavMap and see where we are. So we can see our aircraft is at the ground, on the ground at London Stansted. I've already penciled in the flight plan in LittleNavMap, so we're using a standard instrument departure called CLN4S, which takes us out to this waypoint CLN, Clacton. Notice on the elevation plan we have to stay at 6,000 feet. So we're climbing for 6,000 feet by D267M, and then we are staying at 6,000 feet until we get to Clacton. Then we can climb to 12,000 feet, fly along to top of descent, and then we descend for approach into runway 6 at Rotterdam, and it's fairly straightforward. I'm not going to bother with air traffic control or anything like that. I'm just going to do the flight straight off. So let's get going. So I've already saved the flight plan into X-Plane, so the first thing we need to do is go through the startup procedures for the 737. So where are we doing? So switch the batteries to on. So I've got various keys to flick around. So batteries to on. Ground services GPU connect. So we go into the tablet, we go to home, and ground services GPU connect. Oh, we can also let the service crews on the ground to go and hoover the airplane out while we're doing stuff. So back in the overhead panel, we switch the ground power to on, because now we've connected out externally to the generators. We can have ground power. Overhead panel IRS. So we are going to go and switch on the inertial guidance system. So these both go to nav. It will say on DC, and then it will switch to a line in a moment. There it goes. We can switch this heading status mode, and it tells us 8, which is 8 minutes until the inertial guidance is ready to go. Next, I've got a printed paper checklist next to me, by the way, so I don't miss things out. Overhead panel. Switch on the window heat and the probes. So, up here, above, if I look at this from the cockpit side view, I can show you where these are. They're all up here, but I move the view around to make it easier for myself. So, I need to switch the heaters on the windows and the probes outside, and that's fine. We need to tell ground services we're fed up with them hoovering now, so they can go away, and we can start the flight leg and start letting passengers on. And you can hear them chitter chattering in the background. If we go and stand around the corner, you can hear them doing things. Okay, so we've done the probe, we've let ground services do their work, we've started the flight leg. So FMC. So we're going to go into the flight management computer. The first thing we need to do is initialize the positioning. So position initialization. You can see it doesn't know where we are at the moment. We can go next page and pick up this. Oh, we have to clear this error first. That just means our Navigraph data is out of date, which is fine. So I clicked on that, which has put this value into the buffer from the GPS. I can go previous page and I can put it into the IRS position, and that's done. We can also set our gate number. I think we're at 34 left. Oh, we have to put the airport first. It would help, wouldn't it? So clear what I've just typed. EGSS. We don't have to fill this in, by the way. 34 left. And then we can go to route. And I'm going to go into company route. And then we're going to go to EGSS. Oops, it's already typed in, of course. To what was the name of the EHRD? So EGSS is already typed in. EHRD, and I say company route, and it loads it and activates it, and I execute that, and we can go and check things, but we'll do performance initialization first. So our gross weight, so let's go and have a look how much fuel have we got on board? So payload, 110.9 thousand pounds. So back down to the FMC, 110.9 goes into the gross weight. Reserves, we'll say 5. Cost index 50. Flight level we're going to fly at will be 12. So 12. Oh, that's it's 120, isn't it? Yeah, clear. That's it, flight level 120. Not 12. It's times 100 basically, so it's 12,000 feet. We can execute that. N1 limits. Takeoff, so flaps 5 we'll be using. We can put our rotation speeds in and transfer across because they've been calculated for us. We can also put in our centre of gravity. So if we go and check over on the tablet, it's saying takeoff weight centre of gravity is 22.8%. So we can go back into the FMC and put in 22.8%. And that gives us trim of 4.5. So if we go and sit in the pilot's position and look down at the trim, we can move this little arrow to about 4.5 on the gauge, and that means the plane will be well balanced when it takes off. Let's go and check departure and arrival. So we're departing on runway 4. We're using SID CLN4S, so it has loaded the flight plan correctly. We can go and check the arrival as well. We're landing on ILS for runway 6, which is great. We can go and look at legs and make sure that there is a discontinuity. After CLN, it's got a discontinuity. So let's go and have a quick look in LittleNavMap. So Clacton, it wants another waypoint basically before it will behave itself. So we'll pick one en route. There's one there. EH254, that will do. So we'll put in EH254 and program that into there, and I'm not sure quite why it does that. It seems to be, maybe it's a bug with the simulator, I'm not really sure. So let's have a look down through, that's all looking good. So this should be coming up soon. If we go and have a look back overhead, got 3 minutes to go, which is fine. Okay, we've got lots of warnings still because we haven't got the engines running, basically. So everything's working. So we've programmed the flight plan and we move on. So we go back overhead, we switch on the yaw dampers. Fuel pumps, we're going to switch them on. So it's saying we've got low pressure on the centre pumps because I've got no fuel in the centre tank, so I'll turn those off. Fasten seatbelt sign to on, so we can ask the passengers to sit down now. Hydraulic pumps, so they're already on. APU bleed to on. We're about to switch on the APU basically. Turn this knob to set the cruising altitude, so we're going to be going to 12,000 feet. This will set up the pressurization system in the cabin. So we go and APU to on, wait a few seconds, and then APU to start and hold it on for a few seconds until the needle starts moving on this gauge, and there we go. So APU is starting. We'll hear everything coming to life in a moment. So we've done the cruising altitude, anti-collision lights. Turn the anti-collision lights on. So we're waiting for the 3 blue lights on the bus transfer. So the middle light will come on as soon as the APU is up to speed. And then we switch the inner switches to on. So that means we've transferred over to the APU away from the external power. So we can now disconnect the GPU, the ground services. So we can go to home, we can go to ground services and disconnect. And then disconnect GPU, we've done that. Okay, so now the pilot can go talk to the passengers as well. So PA system will say hello from the flight deck back to the passengers. We can listen to that happening.
It looks like it should be pretty good.
And we can start pre-planning our pushback. So we can go back into the tablet and go to home, and we can say, where are we? Ground services, better pushback, pre-plan. So there's our airplane, and it's already been put in. We'll delete it and put it back in. So I can use the mouse wheel to tell ground services where I want the aircraft pushed to. So that will put it there, and we press enter.
Ground to cockpit. Plan acknowledged. Call me through the menu when you're ready.
That's fine. So then we can go to the menu again, and we can say request actual pushback.
Cockpit. Tow is driving up.
So we'll see the tow driving up now. So if we go and sit back up in the cockpit, we'll see the tow truck come around, and because it's not very clever, it will drive through the scenery to get to us. So we wait now for the tow truck to get connected, and then he'll give us, once he's connected and we've put the wheel brakes on, or sorry, release the wheel brakes so he can push us, we'll be allowed to start the engines. He'll ask us. Starting the engines is fairly trivial in a 737, but we'll wait, and I'll go through it when we get there. While we're doing this, while we're waiting, we can get the heading ready for takeoff. So
okay, all doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
So they're still doing their work outside. Let's go and have a quick look. So see the truck pulling in, and you'll see these clamps go around the front wheel. I think it will jitter when it comes to a stop slightly. Yeah, there it goes. So you can see the clamps coming around the wheels. And then if we look from inside, you'll see the aircraft start to lift. So if you look at the railings down here, you can see them dropping away, because we're being lifted slightly into the air at the front end. So then they'll ask for the wheel brakes.
So connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
That's done. So we should start moving.
Pushback, and you may start engines.
Okay, so we are moving. Okay, so to start the engines, we turn the right engine knob over here to GRD, and that will start this number climbing. So this is the engine, the APU is basically using the bleed air to push the engine around to speed it up. As soon as it gets to 25, we can advance the throttle to idle. So advance that throttle to idle, and it will carry on past 25 now. You can see the exhaust gas temperature is raising, the fuel flow is increasing, and the N1 speed is increasing. So N2 is the gas turbine, N1 is the turbofan. So once that's stabilised, we'll start the second engine in exactly the same way. You will notice this will switch back to auto all on its own. It's just done it. I didn't do that. So GRD on engine number 1. So you can see it's climbing. The gas turbine is coming up to 25%. 25% of nominal, I should say. Once it gets to 25, it's using the bleed air from the auxiliary power unit to do that. Once it gets to 25% of its top speed, we can advance the throttle to idle, which introduces the fuel, ignites, and the jet engine. Yeah, you can see exhaust gas temperature is raising. The N1 speed is coming up because there's a gearbox between N2 and N1. Fuel flow is increasing. So we're getting there. And as luck would have it, we've now been pushed out onto the taxiway. So they want us to reset the parking brake.
Disconnecting tow, stand by.
Okay, so let's get things ready. So we want auto throttle speed to be about 220 knots. We want our altitude we initially climb out to be 6,000 feet. Disconnect hand signal out of the window to the guy with the truck. now we have the engines running, we can switch the APU bleed to off, switch the packs to auto. That's the air conditioning packs that regulate.
We'll see you next time and have a safe flight.
They regulate the temperature inside the cockpit. Make sure left and right switches are on. They are. Switch Gen 1 and Gen 2 to on the APU gen. So this is the outer switches this time. So this gives us away from the APU back to the jet engines are now producing the power for the aircraft. So we now can turn the APU off. So we've got APU bleed off, then we switched over power to the jet engines, and then we switched off the APU. So we're now producing electricity from the jet engines. And that's about it. We turn the taxi lights on and we're ready to go. So taxi lights on. And we can taxi. Obviously, in the real world, you'd be talking to air traffic control and ground, then tower, and then departures. But we're going to taxi straight out. So we're not going to use the whole runway. So we're down near the end of the runway anyway. So flaps to 5 degrees. So flaps are travelling now. We can see on the little gauge over here. I'm doing this all rather quickly because I want to be able to finish the flight before my lunchtime ends. So we're pulling out onto the runway. Oh, we're on the wrong end of the runway. So there's no traffic around. So I'm going to go to the other end of the runway. So we're onto the active runway. We would have asked air traffic control for permission and said we're being an idiot. So we're just going to quickly roll to the other end of the runway. Do a U-turn, a UE, and then get on our way. I'm trying not to go too fast. The wind is pushing the tailplane quite hard. Start slowing down. Okay. So we really should have gone down the taxiway, but I forgot all about it until we were pulling out. Okay. Quickly spin round. Just about make it before the grass. Oh, or not quite. Okay. And we'll accelerate straight down the runway. Let's get the airplane straight. Let's have a look. So we'll turn the TCAS system on. Full throttle. Let's get on the centre line.
80 knots. V1 rotate.
Rotate. So you're looking for 15 degrees. Gear up. Flaps to 1.
400.
Flaps up. And we can immediately go for autopilot on, LNAV mode. Auto throttle armed. We'll go for 250 knots straight away. And we're following the flight plan. The autopilot is now in operation. We're doing a climb at, we'll lower the rate of climb to 2,500 feet a minute. So we're coming up to 6,000 feet. And we'll follow that until we get to the waypoint we talked about. So this is following the standard instrument departure at the moment. So we're now 250 knots. We overshot the first turn slightly. Not a major problem. Okay, so we can see the route here, the CLN. So as soon as we get to CLN, we can zoom out, we can see more of the route. Oh, the CLN, sorry, that's the waypoint on the way to it. So as soon as we get to CLN, we will start our climb up to 12,000. And we'll accelerate as well. Well, we'll have to get through 10,000 feet first before we can accelerate. But we'll start climbing. So it's all pretty standard stuff, really. The dotted line you can see around the aircraft is TCAS, the traffic collision avoidance system. If anything flies into that perimeter around us, an alarm will go off. If we zoom in slightly, you can see. So that's a 5 mile range on here, so it's about 2.5 miles, just under, for TCAS. Obviously I've got no other aircraft in the air because I'm not simulating it, so there's no risk of that happening. So again, we're kind of happily flying along. It's a cloudy day, which is great. It means we don't get to see a damn thing. But we can see on AviTab on the tablet, we can go into the AviTab menu, we can look in the map, and we can see our aircraft flying over the scenery, which is quite cool. We can change the scenery and we can use open topo maps. Oh, that is the open topo map, I beg your pardon. We could use different ones. If we use Mercator, what you can do with that is save graphics files from LittleNavMap in the appropriate directory within the system, and it will show your LittleNavMap map with the flight plan on it in the map within the aircraft, which is quite cool. Anyway, we don't really need that. We've got GPS, so we're making a left turn. Coming to the end of the standard instrument departure. So again, the aircraft's flying itself. I'm really doing very little now. All you're really doing when you're on autopilot is monitoring things. So you're watching fuel flow, watching how much fuel you've got. Remember I said at the start I had no fuel in the centre tank? I only had the wings full, so therefore I didn't need the central fuel pumps. You can see progress through the legs here. If we go to the progress screen, you can see what your next leg is, how much fuel you've got, what your fuel flow is. It's all quite straightforward, really. So you can go and look at legs. So yeah, you can see here it wants us to be at CLN 6,000 foot. So we will start our climb in a moment up to 12,000. So we can change this already. It won't do anything until we go to vertical speed mode. So we're just approaching CLN, or Charlie Lima November. We can see there's a box appearing around this down here. Does it start flashing? I can't remember. Because you can switch once you're above a certain altitude. I can't remember what the altitude is. did it say 6,000 with the transition altitude? So then you press standard and it becomes 2992 essentially. If you can see, there's a number there. Yeah, so standard is the same, but the practice is that once you get above your transition altitude, you switch to standard mode, and then when you're descending to the destination airport, you go and look up on the weather report what the atmospheric pressure is at ground level, and you can change the calibration of your altimeter. We'll see that happen when we get there. We can actually look it up. If we go into Avitab and look for airports and search for EHRD, was it? For Rotterdam? Go. Rotterdam, there we go. So, no weather information available. Well, that's really useful then, isn't it? So we'll see how we get on. I'm loath to tab across to LittleNavMap now we're in flight because it tends to mess up the recording. I'm not sure why. Okay, so we were going to climb, weren't we? So let's climb now at 2,000 feet a minute, and we'll increase now. Actually no, we don't want to increase speed yet. We have to wait till we get to 10,000 feet before we can increase speed. So the engines are advancing on their own to match the climb rate. So we're now at 2,000 feet a minute on vertical speed, climbing through 6,500 feet. Speed is restabilizing at 250 knots. Remember, we are in lateral navigation mode, which means the autopilot is following the plan. It's interesting, a lot of people go and play with these simulators and they're really careful about programming the flight plan just so and getting the aircraft to follow it. In the real world, that rarely happens on shorter flights because you're often given vectors from air traffic control to avoid other aircraft. So on the long haul flights, yes, you'll follow the flight plan fastidiously, but as soon as you get near a destination airport, it's not going to happen. You're not going to land with, or very rarely you're going to land with the exact flight plan you had filed. Because other events will come into play, like aircraft that were late leaving or are trying to make up time. It's like the famous saying about no plan survives the first sight of the enemy. And in our situation, the enemy is the world. So we're coming up through 9,000 feet towards 10. Going to be at top of climb very soon. We can zoom out on the radar. We can actually see the destination already. So we're not going to be at this altitude for very long at all. So we're now at 10,000 feet and we're going to push on to 330 knots. Or 320 knots we'll go for. So the engines have advanced, we're now accelerating. The green line is the speed we will be doing in I think it's 6 seconds time. So you will see a red marker above the speed we've selected. I think it's probably about 340 knots. It depends what altitude you're at. It may be even faster than that. Which is the, yeah, there you go, 340. So that denotes overspeed as soon as you go into that. It's not massively dangerous to overspeed, but the airplane will complain about it. Obviously, the more you overspeed, the more dangerous it becomes to the airframe. So you're basically stressing the airframe more than you should. So we've now approaching 12,000 feet, so you can see the vertical speed has switched off and it's doing altitude hold mode basically at 12,000. So it's switched on all on its own, like altitude hold. We've got the speed mode on the auto throttle for 330 knots, which it's now doing, and it's pulling the throttle back gently. You can see that happening as we approach 330. And we can see on the map we have got it tuned for, that would be 40 miles, 80 mile range. So we're about 60 miles from the top of our descent. I'll actually start coming down slightly before that, so we're not in too much of a rush with getting things down and getting things ready for landing. So we just have a few minutes now to fly along. Should we have a look outside? So there's our aeroplane. Over this massive bank of cloud at the moment. So I guess we're that guy with the sunglasses. We can do flyby views as well, I think. So there you go. There's a crosswind. You can see it there, look. We're crabbing sideways the whole time. What does it do? Okay, let's go back inside. It's a lot quieter inside. So we now got about 45 miles to go to the top of descent. Zooming along. Racing over to Rotterdam from London Stansted. Just checking the time. I've got half an hour until the end of my lunch break, so we'll see how it goes. One of the nice things about these study level aircraft is everything's independent in the cockpit, as it should be. So this is where things like X-Plane really win out over the stock planes that are in Flight Simulator 2020 at the moment. That you can sit either side of the cockpit and everything's completely independent, all the switches, all the radios, everything, and everything works in the study level aircraft. So like we can go and have a wander around if I go and press to look back at this panel. I'm not sure that actually, yeah, the microphone controls don't work, but things like, you know, the floodlighting and stuff, if we were in the dark, obviously you'd see the effect of doing that. So the trims all work. You've got the ADF, which is almost obsolete. You never see ADF radio beacons anymore. Nav radios, left and right. You've got the VHF radios, which is the communications radios, left and right. Yeah, you've got the fire suppression systems, you've got the parking brake there, you've got the idle throttles, the trims, flaps, air brakes. We'll probably use the air brakes on the way down. But yeah, all the knobs and everything work. It's really quite impressive. Obviously the FMC is almost completely modelled. I think there's tiny bits that are still missing from that are in the real one, but it's more or less complete. Obviously overhead we've got quite a lot to go play with. So you've got the flight controls over here, the navigation systems, you've got the cross feed for the fuel, bus transfer for the electricity, you've got the standby power, so batteries basically. You've got various controls for the DC, like switching the batteries on, and APU generators, and window heat, anti-ice, electrical or hydraulic pumps I should say, sorry. Yeah, you've got cabin pressure, you've got cabin temperature, you've got the control of the air conditioning system. Further up you've got the inertial guidance used by the GPS. It's interesting, airliners don't just use the GPS triangulation from the satellites, they also use inertial guidance. So from second to second they use the sensors on board to know the acceleration of the aircraft in every axis. It's the same way your phone does it, but I guess phones are a lot more modern than some of the electronics that are in the big airliners. It's all been commoditized and turned into a cheap chip, whereas these things used to have gyros and all sorts, which are probably infinitely more accurate than your phone, but they also don't fail anywhere near as often. Okay, so we're coming up for, if we turn this to 40 miles, we're about 20 miles from top of descent. And remember I said we're going to start descending earlier than we need to, so let's do that now. So we're going to drop back down to 10,000 feet to begin with. and we'll descend at 2,000 feet a minute. Now you'll see it, notice here, it's pulling the throttles back. Look at the airspeed. So pulling the throttles back, it's managed to cancel out, which gives you a bit of a conundrum. If you get too close to the destination and too high and too fast, you will not be able to slow down easily. Because remember, these planes weigh about 70 or 80 tons. And they're very slippery through the air. So slowing them down while descending is something of a struggle. See, this is quite happily gliding, almost on idle, at 330 knots. So we're coming down to 10,000 feet. We're going to lower the speed a bit. We'll go for 250. So before we start descending below 10,000 feet, we need to get down to 250 knots. So we're going to let the speed scrub off. So just waiting for the aircraft to decelerate. So we're gliding essentially. The engines are on full idle. 34%. We'll get ready on the height we want. So we're going to go straight for 3,000 feet. And we're coming down to 250 knots. Start descending at 2,000 feet a minute. And we see how we do. We're going to land on runway 6, aren't we? So we're going to change this. I think it's 55 actually is the actual direction of the runway. So they're correct. 55 degrees. What we haven't looked at is the ILS, so we can cheat and look in here, go to airports. Runway 6 ILS is 109.1 for Rotterdam. So we need to look on the radio. It's already on 109.1. I did this flight recently, so it's already got it. We're going to tune nav 2 over to it as well then. 109 point, oops, 109.1. Switch that to active. We'll turn on approach mode on here as well. So we're descending. We've got plenty of time. If we zoom out on the compass, we can see where our destination is. It's about 60 miles away. 55 miles-ish. We're down to 7,000 feet. The speed is creeping up though, we're getting too fast, so we're going to extend the air brakes. We could make our descent shallower, or we can extend the air brakes. So if we look outside, what the air brakes actually are, those are the air brakes. They're flaps on the top of the wing that just give the plane some drag basically. So we can see the ocean just down there. And we're looking good. It's coming back to 250 knots. About 5,600 feet, nearly down to 3,000. Actually, let's raise this up to 4. Should we go for 5,000 feet? And we'll descend the last couple of thousand when we get nearer the approach. So we're now about 40 miles out. So we're just keeping an eye on things really. So as we get closer to the destination, we'll start reducing our speed, we'll feed the flaps in, we'll get the gear down, we'll engage approach mode as soon as we have the ILS engaged. So what we can do, this is one of the huge advantages of having both displays, we can get the display on this side ready to use it at the same time. So we want this to show the, what's called the arc, I guess. Is it called that on this one? It's map display on the 737. It's all arc mode on the Airbus. So we'll leave the map display over there. We're going to switch this side to be approach mode soon. As soon as we get close to this turn. So then we can keep an eye on where we are relative to the airport, and we can see approach at the same time over this side. Actually, for fun, I might fly the approach manually. We haven't got the flight directors on, have we? The flight director gives you a pink line. It's the autopilot informing what it's trying to do with the attitude of the aeroplane, or even if you're not got the autopilot engaged, it's indicating what the aeroplane would like to do versus what you're doing, if that makes sense. So if it wants to do left deflection of the stick, the pink line, the vertical pink line, will move left. Or if it thinks you should be pulling back, then the pink line will go up. So it's kind of, you know, it wants the plane oriented towards where the crosshair is, not the direction you're going perhaps. Okay, how are we doing? We just hit some cloud. I noticed the engine's just had a bit of a blip. I think we hit some weather. So let's start descending again. So we're going to go for 3,000 feet. And we're going to descend at 2,000 feet a minute. We've still got the air brakes out. I shouldn't really have done that, but oh well. So we're coming down. And we'll release the air brakes and we'll go for
1,000 to go.
220 knots and flaps 1. Really doesn't want to do that, does it? We've got a crosswind of 15 knots. Just wondering why it's struggling. It must be quite bumpy out there. It's struggling to maintain speed quite badly. Yeah, it's getting it now. I think we're being pushed around by the wind. So we're at 3,000 feet. So let's zoom in again. We're now showing 20 miles, so we're 20 miles out from the turn. Let's descend to 2,500 feet.
1,000 to go.
At 500 feet a minute. Mostly so we can see underneath this cloud, hopefully. Let's go down a bit faster. Let's go to flaps 2, just to help stop us accelerating as we go downhill. Obviously as you get lower altitude the air's thicker anyway, which helps. Okay, so we're not going to get to see anything until we descend out of the cloud, which is fine. let's go for 180 knots. We've now got a GPS, we've now got the ILS localizer. We're not locked onto it yet, we've got hollow diamonds are showing up on the display. So we can switch to approach mode. So this is now reflecting the actual direction of the runway. So there's the horizontal component of the ILS, so we're off to the left of the beam, which is correct if you think in terms of the map. The runway's here. So we are to the left of it, and we are below the beam at the moment. So we're approaching at 2,500 feet, so this far out the beam is way above us in the sky. But that will obviously come down over time, and this will sweep in. So we go for flaps 5. On 70 knots. Let's get the gear down. Right, I'm going to take over control of the aircraft myself. So auto throttle off, autopilot off, turn the warning off. Slowly ascending, we shouldn't be, we should be starting to descend slowly, but I'm waiting for the glide slope basically. Back at 2,500. We can zoom in over here. Where's the range? Go for flaps 15. So we're slowly decelerating and going for more and more flaps. So we're waiting for the ILS to come in. We can see on the map over here how close we are to that happening. So we'll see that bar start to move when we get closer to it. It's actually started, look. Just very slowly. I don't want to descend too much yet. It's at 2,000 feet now. We'll hold on to 2,000 feet until the vertical glide slope comes down. So I put full flaps, there's more drag, so we're having to counteract that with a bit more engine. So we're going to start making our turn. We're still at 2,000 feet. We're now lined up more or less with the horizontal component of the glide slope, so we're waiting for the vertical component. off to the right slightly. Just going to stop that flashing because it's annoying me. So here comes the locked on vertical part of the glide slope, so we can start descending and following it down. So we'll fly level for the moment. It's off slightly to the left. So we're going to turn right slightly. Re-establish the horizontal part of the glide slope. A bit more. Yeah, we're being pushed left because there's a crosswind, so it nose down. It's a 15 knot crosswind, and that's what's pushing us left. So we're coming back on towards the centre line. We're a little bit high. You can see the runway out there. But we're going to keep an eye on ILS. We're not going to watch the runway. So let's get the view straightened up. Let's get back on plan, shall we?
Feet stabilized, Mr. Birch altitude set.
So gear is down, flaps are at full throw, and we're getting there. No one approach. Normally, and obviously in the real thing, you'd be talking to the tower and or approach, and then the tower, and then ground on the way down as well. So all I'm basically doing is just gently following the ILS glide slope and keeping that on speed on the way. We're a little bit high.
500. 400.
So small inputs. Don't need anything drastic.
300.
So from this point you can switch over from watching ILS to looking at the ground and just orient yourself with the runway. We're a little bit low, that's fine.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
There we go. There was quite a lot of turbulence just near the ground there. That was quite mad. So, thrust reversers on.
80 knots.
The plane was being thrown around quite a lot that last little bit once we got near the ground. Thrust reversers back off. Flaps up. That was an interesting one. It was a bit of a struggle to get it down. So clear of active. Normally you'd be telling the tower that you're clear of active, and then they would transfer you over to ground. Then you'd be given taxiing instructions, and you get your chart out and look at where you are and where the taxiways are, unless you knew it, obviously. So I'm going to end the film here because there's no point following a taxi across an airfield. It's hardly exciting, is it? Okay, so there you go. That was a video, a quick flight from Stansted to Rotterdam. And I'm going to stop recording now.